Hello, good morning. Not a good morning, actually. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching the Sashiko Live Streaming. This is Atsushi. We will do the live streaming. No, I'm sorry. We will talk about Sashiko and Boro while I practice Sashiko. ちょっと待って。おはようございます。こんばんは。Atsushi です。金曜日のお昼ですね。YouTube では金曜日の昼の金曜日のお昼は日本語でじゃなくてすみません。ごめん、いろいろ間違えてる。金曜日のお昼は日本語ではなく英語でやるんですけど、夜に日本語でやるのでまた戻ってきてもらえたら嬉しいです。すいません。ボロボロですいません。また英語に戻します。Sorry, it was a little bit of confusion. Today I would like to talk about Boro again. So I wrote it that it is another episode of many challenges, many tries of explaining what Boro is. It is quite difficult to explain what Boro is. I wish I could give you just one definition, but it's not that easy. So while I stitch Sashiko, I will try to share as many stories as possible, and I hope you can bring some of your project and you can stitch or you can move your hands and let's think what Boro is together. Questions are welcome. I do not answer any technical questions because those are already online or I teach them. But if it's related to Sashiko or Boro culturally, I am happy to answer those questions. All right, let's start with the stitching. I will go off with my camera here because I'm not gonna be in anyway. So I'll be stitching. Yep. Wait. Sorry, I have to check the... Okay, perfect. Sorry, I was checking the audio. It's all good. It's all good. Let me stitch a little bit so I can be on the rhythm. The reason I keep talking about Boro, I hope you can hear me that. The reason I keep talking about Boro is that it is interesting to see how Boro became a completely different word in not only Western culture, it's pretty much outside of the Japan. Outside of Japan, the Boro became a very different word. It can be in other East Asian countries or even Sakura. Don't play with that. And there are words for this kind of phenomena. We call it 言葉の一人歩き, which means that the word started moving or walking toward by itself without actual accompanying. So what is Boro for you? Probably the answer is the technique to recycle the fabric or patchworking techniques, or there are a lot of definitions available online or even books. None of them are wrong, but they don't really fulfill everything together. That is the challenge I'm trying to face too. And I think it requires a lot of stories to explain, not even explain, to form or to illustrate the outer line of this, what Boro is, without sharing the Japanese expectation, the language or the philosophy, the common sense in Japanese people. The only way to share what Boro is to share as many story as possible. And that's this live streaming. That's my Instagram. So I hope you can find something out of this live streaming as well as my writing. So to begin with, what I want to know is that the not introduction, the definition or the description about Boro written in English is most likely, I have not read everything yet, so it's kind of dangerous to say it, but most likely they do not illustrate the whole picture of Boro. Um, Especially if they define it, they do not illustrate the whole picture of Boro. We this is not anybody's fault, but we understand the materials as we wish, right? We, not only you, not only they, I do too. It is like I understand the materials as I wish. So based on who is listening, the message can be different. For example, um, some of the things I got really surprised when I moved to the US is that many people think the sushi as the healthy choice, healthy option for the dinner or eating out. And yes, it is healthier in comparison to the other choices. But in Japan, I have never met anybody who goes to sushi place because it's healthy. I mean, it's tasty. It's a good place to go. But that was a big surprise to me that they choose sushi because it's a healthy option. And it could be the result of marketing. At the same time, it is already something different. The sushi is different. Sushi in Japan and sushi in the US are a completely different thing, and that's okay. The culture change, and there's nothing wrong with it. But the point is that sashiko is not so established even in Japan. And if the Sashiko or Boro in English is written over by somebody else who do not know Japanese culture, the whole Japanese culture, um, something essential will be lost over time if I do not speak up. Definition or this description of Boro may be true over time. Wikipedia is a great resource, but not everything is 100% correct. So that's what Boro is experiencing. It is something that you are understanding. You probably understanding the right thing, but it's not enough because of the lack of stories, lack of resources. And it's really unfortunate. It's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's kind of our fault. The Japanese responsibility to share the stories. But it is very unfortunate because there in between those people too, if one translate as if he or she knows everything, then that's a very scary thing. And because of their introduction interpretation, the culture can be filtered or skimmed, which I'm trying to avoid. Even like Zen, right? Zen, you know the word Zen. People call Sashiko as Zen, but it's opposite, by the way. If you think that Zen as the Zen, how to say Zen stitching? Do we call that kind of Zen-ish stitching? That's completely opposite of Sashiko. Many people understand Zen as probably mindfulness, right? That's the Steve Jobs introduced. So Zen is more like mindfulness, so calming, relaxation. So many people, many Western people associate the Zen to those calming perspective, right? Perspective. I believe so. I believe that's the correct, that's the ongoing understanding of Zen. And that's why, Zen, Zen tangling? I don't remember. But there are a lot of things to calm yourself, and that's many people call it Zen. And it is very true that Sashiko is relaxing, and therefore, it's really understandable to. But that's kind of that's also another unfortunate thing because they do not understand fully. So Zen is a status. It's not the action, or it's not the hobby, or it's not doing. It's being. Zen is the status. Zen is the word for the status of being, not the doing. So there are practice of Zen, which is you sit down and then face to the wall. I'm not a Zen professional, so there's a lot of ramification of the Zen, so I cannot summarize into one. But that's a Zen practice. But the Zen itself means that the state of mind or even heart or even like emotion does not move at all. The stabilized emotion, stabilized mind of the status of that is called Zen. Who? And as you know, Sashiko is completely opposite. I want you to enjoy the emotions. I want you to put all of the emotions inside of this stitching. As the result, your stitching becomes something attractive. Not attractive, something like yours. I don't want you to be empty while you stitch. This is something I always tell in my class. I want you to be empty in terms of technique or result. So I don't want them to keep judging themselves how accurate they are or how beautiful they are. I don't want them to focus on that. So I want them to be empty for that. But at the same time, it is impossible, almost impossible to become completely empty when you stitch because you have to think about something. I mean, Zen is different for that. You are training yourself to be empty. But when you stitch, you have to kind of think about something. I mean, if you stitch 24/7, 24 hours, there might be the moment that you don't think at all. But usually you have to kind of stop being empty. You will think about something. And that moment is the most important things in Sashiko because either it can be anger or pleasure or happiness or sad, anything. Those emotions will be your stitching. It's not your eye or consciousness or brain or anything to decide what kind of stitching you want to make. It is not that. It is more like how you are, how you feel, how we are doing at that moment, and accumulation of those small things. Those small things called ordinally defined what your stitching is. Not a define, illustrate, sorry. So then is kind of opposite. Like I don't want you to be that empty when you stitch. And being like Zen is the outcome of stitching. It is true. You may feel as if you had a Zen meditation. So it has a very similar outcome, but approach is almost opposite. Boro is the same too. Outcome, the people who introduced Boro to the other field, probably, this is my guess, so it might be wrong, but they probably look at only the result, outcome, how it look. As the result, the Boro becomes technique, but Boro is not the technique at all. It's not a technique. It's like how can I say that? It's like one moment of a lifelong stitching journey. So it's not Sashiko versus Boro, it's just Sashiko and then Boro. If you keep stitching, it's gonna be Boro eventually. I mean, of course, it's gonna take a lot of time to do it, but Boro is the accumulation or layers of those emotions as well as the ordinary liquid, sweat, blood, food, leftovers. I mean, we wash it, but at the same time, those are it's like underwear. Not underwear, I'm sorry. Well, but something you wear like something you wear every day, something you wash every night. Well, probably washing clothes. So that's probably underwear but that's probably how they used it. All right, I got some questions, so I will go back to the questions. When you say we don't understand we want to understand, can you help us understand better? Well, that's the whole purpose of this live stitching. There's no way to explain Sashiko or Boro in one word. I mean, it's Japanese, it's culture. It's not it's something you can understand. I mean, you can pretend that you understand it, but there's no way that you understand in one sentence. Um, there's no definition because it's like we do not have to define word, but we can have the common sense in Japanese culture, and I have to kind of explain how to be in that status. So once they say that they understand Sashiko, that's kind of the end of the studying, the end of they are missing the part already. I am currently doing a sample of hemp pattern, and I have noticed that my middle keeps on crossing. Please take my workshop. There is a way to make it happen. But yeah, please take my workshop. There's no tips. Pretty much every questions can be answered by not every, but most of the questions can be answered in my class. But it's probably harsh to hear for you, but expecting that we can understand other culture in one word or one sentence is already culturally inappropriate. Like, okay, I understand Sashiko is blah blah blah, Boro is blah blah blah. That is a little bit too violent. I mean, if it's not the cultural word, that's okay. I mean, it's not okay actually for that. Like, I understand what sushi is really scary word. If you have never been to Japan, if you don't know any sushi, I know what sushi is quite dangerous, don't you think? It's really like I understand the Americans Indians culture because I know the dream catcher. That is a very insufficient statement. The same as Sashiko too. There are people who spend their whole life in that, and we are. I am trying my best to illustrate the whole picture of Sashiko, but it's it requires a lot of studying. Ideally, um, learning the Japanese as a language is probably the best. But that's too much to ask for, especially for those who only want to practice Sashiko. The Japanese are not that much necessary. But that's the kind of expectation, especially if somebody wants to teach Sashiko. I really expect them to be able to speak English, I mean Japanese, if they're teaching. I do have an online workshop, so for the workshop wise, under COVID, it is very difficult to join. So, but I do have an online class. So, and I'm pretty sure that, not pretty sure. I became confident that I can share what I do, even online after. I mean, we've been through a lot of difficulties in COVID, but one thing I can say for sure is that I invested a lot of time and effort in the online teaching online. So I think I can, as long as one doesn't give up in the middle, which is not really difficult, just as long as one continue practicing, they can understand, or they can stitch the way they wish. Yeah, Boro is it's just so it's not difficult to explain this in Japanese because we have already the common expectations. That's why I don't write in Japanese a lot and I don't really talk about it in Japanese a lot. But especially the Western culture, we always believe that there is the answer for the question. We believe that there's always somebody who will be teaching, and I am willing to teach. I am willing to share the stories, but at the same time, sometimes the answer is not something easy to just getting it by reading one book or reading one, even sometimes one sentence. And that's probably the start. That's the start. That's the very start of the. If I call it true learning, I wouldn't call it true learning. But if you like to learn what Sashiko is, the first step is that it is not possible to get the whole picture just within a day or so. If you have been watching these videos, I mean, I've been doing this live streaming for 2 years. It's not periodic, but if I keep doing that, if you're here watching for a long time, you probably understand what I mean, because I pretty much talk something different every time. The message is the same. I hope I'm not contradicting, but at the same time, I try to share as many stories as possible around to illustrate. So that's another thing. Like wabi-sabi is another word. Probably many people think they understand it. I don't. I'm sorry, I do not understand what wabi-sabi is, because once I can explain that, I probably don't consider it a wabi-sabi anymore. So, like, let's say, well, that that this cup is so wabi-sabi. People might say that I have no idea what he or she is talking about, and they try to explain that what it is. But once they can explain what wabi-sabi is, it is no longer wabi-sabi for us. So it's a very weird culture and weird concept, and that's something we have to keep insisting or sharing. We don't have to make, like, the Japanese, we means like the Japanese do not have to, sorry, the Japanese do not have to define what is right and what is wrong. Don't you think it's scary? I think it's really scary after being in the US, but for us it was normal when I was in Japan. The Sashiko and Boro, many other things are around it, are based on that ordinarily. So it's probably very difficult for. There are many probably Japanese as well. There are probably some Japanese, or even not even, yeah, there are many people, including Japanese or non-Japanese, like anybody. There are people who offer you the definitions or answers. Not everybody's. How can I say that? I am not trying to be mean. I am just trying to be honest. I am not trying to, be indirect. I just wanna, in order to really, really share what is going on and what it is, there's no way that I can just give you one single answer. But of course, there are probably gonna be the people who give you the quick answer. And the result of the quick answer and the result of the demand for the quick answer is making today's trend. And that's a great marketing. That's one type of great marketing. But my goal is not to be famous. My goal is not to make money for that. I need money to make it happen, but I do not plan, it's not my goal to be billionaire or millionaire by doing this. I need money to make it happen, but that's a different thing. So it's there are many ways to make it easier, but I really want you to doubt. I mean, that I want you to know that you're trying to learn, trying to understand a completely different thing. If you live in Japan, probably you will experience a lot of not even abnormal, extraordinary things. And that extraordinary is ordinary for us, and our ordinary is your extraordinary. So it's not easy. The borough is another example. Boro is not the word for the colorful patchwork. It is not the word for the colorful patchwork. In fact, like, it is very difficult to define it, so I'm not gonna even define it. Personally, I do not like the colorful patchwork and calling it Boro or even Boro inspired. The reason I say that is I don't know what they are inspired by. By the look, probably, by the concept, or by the stories. Either way, using a colorful like red or pink or those like bright colors on the Boro pieces is strange. Strange. It's not really, hurting my feeling, but it's really strange, weird. What is gonna be a good example for that? It's not ordinary. It's not the in the middle run. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Just it's strange. And if they say that that's the Boro, then I have to say what? It might be a bad analogy, but it's like putting some candies on the pizza. again, it's extreme analogy. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with eating the pizza with candy on topping. I mean, I used to like dipping the French fries into the milkshake. So there's a way to enjoy the salty food and sweet things. So there's nothing wrong with putting the sweet topping on top of the pizza. But not everybody agreed that it is the orthodox or the mainstream of pizza. But when you go to some other countries, you find that the mainstream of pizza is topping on some Snickers or Reese's or something like that, something sweet. And you can say like, that's a little strange. That's a very strange. But I mean, again, it's my personal preference. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It is strange. And when they call it Boro inspired, my understanding is that what is that inspired by? Although we can never understand another culture, I feel our lives are enriched by hearing each other's stories. What do you think about this? It is very true. I am not expecting everybody to understand another culture. Um, I moved to the US. I'm trying my best to be the American, and I do respect the culture here. I follow, outside of the Sashiko activities, I follow to the American culture as much as I can. The point is Lori, right? The point is Lori wrote down exactly what it is. We just have to listen. Like, this live streaming is not the place to judge others or blame others for that matter. I'm just saying that there are stories besides the stories you may know, which is done by Japanese. But unfortunately, majority of the stories, majority of the definition, majority of teaching right now in Sashiko or Boro or even trend is not done by Japanese or the Japanese who actually practice Sashiko. they did a great job. The people who translated, the people who brought it to the US, they did a great job. I'm not going to minimize their work. They did a great job, but it's not whole. It is not enough. It's not enough to say that they can teach, for that matter, I guess. But as long as we practice, as long as we enjoy the word Sashiko practice, it is not expectation to fully understand it. It's not a possible. But we can all listen, right? That's probably all I'm asking, and you are here and listening, so that's exactly pretty much everything I'm asking. But they don't listen. Some people really do not wish to listen. They literally intentionally ignore what I say, or what we say for that matter. In that case, I have to speak up, right? And this is not something I decided to do it out of nowhere. I've been thinking about how to do it last 3 years almost. Many people told me that I'm overreacting. I was overreacting. They kept saying that they should enjoy the freedom, which I have no idea what freedom is anymore. Freedom for them means that it's something they want to listen, not the freedom. They want to hear. They want to just hear what they want to hear. So it's really not a freedom. So what was I saying? Yeah, as long as we are listening each other, and for that it is pretty fair. I think it's fair for me to say that the Japanese who speak Japanese and who have been practicing Sashiko is more accountable for the stories. Look, my stories are just my childhood, my memories. I do not illustrate. I do not, how can I say, fantasize, or I do not romanticize what it is. I'm doing exactly what I was seeing it when I was a child. And you are looking at it. You are looking at it too. So this is exactly what I was looking. Well, of course, over the camera. So the whole purpose of this live streaming is to recreate what I was going through when I was a child. I said that I wanted to take the online class or in the workshop. It is because that it's the 3 hours of very condensed, very efficient way to learn Sashiko. But at the same time, it's not necessary. You can just keep watching this and probably learn a lot, and you can practice that. But the point is that if somebody asks the technical questions, that means that they are already expecting to get answers very, very quick in the short term. That's not gonna do well in the process of learning. Therefore, I want them to take the class. Like, I want them to have my personal attention so that they can change it, some of the expectations. But if you do not ask the technical questions, there are many people who just watch this live streaming and get the same result as the workshop or class, because I do not edit this. I'm not changing anything. Many people say that I shouldn't do this because, many people will copy that. Please do copy it. Please do copy it. Please do. It's not that difficult to copy. Please copy, but at the same time, please also share the stories, or please share the source of the stories, which is me, so that this Sashiko I would like to pass down is gonna be somewhat like it is not me who decide what Sashiko will be in the future. It is not me. It is somebody later on this. But it is not fair for us, the Japanese, if somebody in the future decided what Sashiko is based on the majority, the voice from the majority, voice from the bigger. I don't want to say privilege, but the English, the English is a very strong strong language. So as long as I can leave my voice, they can learn from it in the future or even now. And the more people understand it, the more the whole picture of the Boro and Sashiko will be left. I have great respect for you speaking your truth. Thank you. It's it is impossible to, expect each other to learn everything. I'm not really expecting that. And it's kind of funny. Loli said that in the first comment, we do like the first step is to understand that we do not know the whole picture yet. Even I don't know it. Even I don't know the whole picture. We have to keep illustrating that. We have to keep collecting those stories. I can speak my own Sashiko, and that's 100%, confident. But that's not the whole picture of Sashiko. Therefore, I do not call my Sashiko like the extreme or the only Sashiko, because it's not. Simply because it is not. So the first step is to know that we do not know the whole. And understanding one Sashiko can be a good start to understand the other Sashiko. And you can start from anywhere. You can start from anywhere you want. But since I do have a structured technique, which not many people offer, I learn, it is probably easier for you to keep start from there. Start from there and then get more later. I say I do not practice the other Sashiko, but the reason I can say that is because of my student in Japanese in Japan are from the other Sashiko, and they enjoy what I teach as well. So that's the reason I keep saying that. So today's story's kind of summary is that we listen, we visualize, we understand the message within the word as we wish. It doesn't matter what it is. We understand what as we wish. It's not only you, it's not only somebody else, it's all of us. And right now, the sustainabilities and recycling, upcycling, those were the trend in the fashion of crafting, and all of us were looking for the word to promote what they're doing, kind of like catch copy or key phrase to sort of market themselves, to promote, to sell product or item or art or ideas, teaching service easier because of that word. And it is now became Boro, but unfortunately the actual Boro in Japan is kind of left behind it. I mean, actual Boro means like piece of crap. I'm sorry to say the bad word, like piece of ass. Like literally, the one definition, not a definition. Like if you check the encyclopedia, the second line of the Boro is the horse feces. That's the Japanese people's understanding. if I say I grab the Boro, which means that they grab the horse feces. That's the word. When did it become like a fantasy word? Well, there's a story behind. Then, we are some of the Japanese are very guilty on that. Guilty, yes. It's a very shameful, and I'm very much sorry, and I'm very embarrassed by the Japanese people who did it. Should I talk about this story? I probably should. I did. Hello, Maggie. I love listening to the spaces between the word and the feeling. Oh, sorry. I'm just having trouble hearing you today. Is your volume up? Is it better now? Sorry. Do you hear me well? The last time some people said that I was too loud. Listening to the space between my word. Wow, that's I cannot thank enough for that. That's the that's very flattering. I really appreciate that. That's like some people think that I'm mean. I am just trying to not to be mean, right? Like I try to be mean that I do not offer the answer. And somebody said that it's arrogant. Somebody said many people say those things like he's just hiding the secret. He's not telling the truth. No, the truth does not exist in the world because of the Japanese culture. It exists between the lines. So I'm sorry to say, this is the only way to share what it is. Another reason I don't have a book published yet. There are several publishers who contact me, and I wish I could have published the book by now. But how can I write the book like this? I just, the book. In order to write a book, what we need is the answer, right? You have to have especially if I'm gonna write a book about Sashiko Boro, it has to have the answer. Has to have the answer. Otherwise, it's not gonna sell, and they have to sell. The publisher has to sell. And I'm not writing the philosophical book. If I am writing a philosophy book, probably that's a different story. But then the audience, the reader, is not gonna be interested in Sashiko. So this is the only way that I can illustrate. And I don't have to do this to Japanese people because we share the same expectation. The Japanese people expect each other to take off the shoes when they go to their each house. There's no that's the basic expectation. There's no space for the personal choice there. Oh, I prefer to wear the shoes in the house, so I'm not gonna take off that in your house. It's not even a choice. It's just taboo, social taboo. That is one of millions of examples of what I'm trying to share. Huh. That's why many people say that I'm doing something impossible to do, but I have to do it. I have to do it, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, I'm willing to do it. So put in empty pages. I am doing yeah. What is that? Empty pages. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So the Boro became pretty famous in 2000-ish. So there's a very legendary person called Tanaka Chuzaburo-san. So he collected a lot of Sashiko pieces and so-called Boro pieces from northern part of Japan, and he's the folkologist, somebody who researched the folk art, I cannot say that word. Anyway, so he had a collection. I should have book somewhere, and one museum decided to have that as the exhibition. We call it Amuse Museum in Asakusa, so-called Boro Museum. They are closed now, and the Boro circulate all over the world right now. And I think it was in Sweden, Stockholm, until very recent, I guess. My friend, not a friend, I don't know if I can call her friend, but the person I respect. Well, but she WhatsApp me. She doesn't email. She just WhatsApp me, and I have to. Anyway, her name is Wada Sensei. Wada Sensei. Miss Wada wrote the essay for that. That's the same borough. It was displayed in the part of the borough. It was displayed in Tokyo, and that is probably the start of trend, or at least acknowledgement. So, just a second, okay? I'm sorry, just a second. Sorry, I thought my daughter woke up. So back to the story. Amuse Museum is probably the start of the, well, one turning point for the Boro. Personally, our family, our stitching Sashiko family, hated Boro for that. We were so proud of Sashiko that we did not like Boro at all. Like, at all. Just a second. This, how the needle slipped off? Yep. So if you know our brand or company before 2012 or 2010, we never made any Boro pieces. Never. Ever. We kind of knew that it would sell well, but we never made Boro, or like Boro was not something to make or to be made with pride. Sorry, so just funny. It's so funny. Okay, I will do that. Thank you. Yes, not having answers opens our mind. Thank you for sharing. When you write a book, put in empty pages. Like after a few pages, I put empty pages to see if we get it. That's a really interesting way. I might get a lot of angry comments then. Where was I stitching? This happens. This happens when I do not focus. And my stories are drifting. I apologize for that as well. The Amuse Museum is probably the beginning of, not a beginning, the one turning point of Boro. Around that, there's a lot of flea market starting in the Tokyo and Kyoto, and there are always those how to call it, like antique dealer. There were many antique dealers from, antique dealers are very respected jobs, so they had to borrow those folklore pieces, like really actual borrowed, not like something we can make today or something. it's more like a museum quality Boro was available 20 years ago, 30 years ago, probably 10 years ago as well. If you go to the flea market, you could still get some of those very, very, very in a cheap price because it's kind of a horse feces. So it was very difficult to even price it. Now it's a different story. It's a completely different story. It is probably very difficult to even find it. I think the Western dealer, I don't know who specifically, but the Boro became the kind of mosaic art figure of sustainability or recycling, or sometimes people say at random in survival, which I kind of disagree because I do not think that the Japanese people, women, put those fabric in that order. I mean, they all, of course, had a very, very limited amount of fabric, so they didn't have much choice. But at the same time, with that much limited choices, I think they had a somewhat the pride to be a little bit more beautiful, and that's making the clothes, well, clothes, jacket, blanket, making those things a little more beautiful is something defines human, right? The clothes is something human is very sort of specialized in. Not many other mammals use the fabric or cloth. So I feel the pride in it. Anyhow, the Boro became famous like that, and the prices started shooting up. Again, since my company, my family did not really like Boro, I did not follow that movement. But the Japanese antique dealers were also surprised why there's so many Western buyers coming, and then they kept buying the price with the price they even ask, or even on top of that. And this is a very bad story, and I'm sorry to share that, but there was some website in Japanese explaining how to make Boro for the Western dealers. So there are people who making Boro to sell it to the another non-Japanese people. And that's very shameful. That's very embarrassing as the same Japanese. But that's the kind of the starting of the trend. It doesn't have to be antique fabric. They said that those people who were selling the sort of borrowed to the non-Japanese people were saying that it doesn't have to be antique as long as it looks like antique, and then you have to kind of use the file or sandpaper, which I kind of don't like, to damage it and put the another piece of vintage looking fabric, and then anybody will buy it. That was about 2010-ish. So be careful when you kind of go to Japan too. I don't think there are many dealers like that anymore because we know what it is at this moment. But there were those moments in Japan as well, and I'm not proud of it. And then last few years, probably 2000s. No. When did Sashiko become so famous? Not Sashiko. When did Boro become so famous in English? It was famous for those who knows the Japanese textile who come to Japan to buy it. But around 2017, Boro was already sort of famous. Many people knew what Boro is if they were in the textile industry. The first time I was invited to the workshop, that's kind of the beginning, was in New York, and the request was to talk about Boro as well. And later on that, I had an opportunity to talk about Sashiko and Boro in the FIT. And they knew about Boro already. That was 2018, I think. Hey. Hey. Then a lot of books started getting published. I do respect them, by the way. Some people might think that I may be fighting or picking a fight with them. I do not. I do not fight with them. I mean, they're very considerable. So there are a lot of books about mending or patchworking with using the word borough, but back then they didn't know it. There were no information, so it's really not the point of fighting back. Then here we go right now. Now borough is probably anything patchworked with colorful or recycled fabric. It's not. It can be borough, but it is not what it was or what it is. And you answer your question might be then what it is. Then the question is what it is then. And I don't know. You gotta come to the understanding the Japanese culture first if you really want to have the answer. But let's think together, because I will share as many stories as possible so we can think together. Thank you for the comment. People make quilts and sell them as antique here in the States. Oh, okay. Thank you for the comment, Shelly. Yeah, that's I think. Yeah, it's there's no way to define the vintage or antique. Well, there is a definition, I guess, but there's no way to prove that unless there is an actual record on that. So since you're listening here this much, I would like to give you one good advice for borough making. One thing you really have to make it borough. Like if you want to call it borough, there's one element that nobody can miss. And if one piece is missing that, I would never call it borough. No matter how it looks like borough, no matter how it is, as long as it's not if the piece is missing one element, I would not call it borough. What is that element? Da-da-da. Thinking time. I'm just kidding. I'm gonna give you the answer, but since there's a little time lag, I'm gonna wait a little bit. I want you to think as well too. There's one element that probably define what borough is, what the authentic borough is, and I do not consider any pieces borough without that element or point. I probably haven't shared this story before, or even on the Instagram. I share this information sometimes on my workshop after there's a second workshop. It's not advanced. It's like a application workshop, and when I do that, I share this information. But I probably should write it soon. Well, may have shared somewhere. Just describe. I'll just Wow, I cannot believe that it has been 1 hour. Okay, let's wrap it up with sharing this information. The one element that I want everybody to have when they try to be inspired by Boro is that Boro requires insane amount of using it. Like excessive amount of using the piece. So without that process, nothing can be Boro. So the Boro behind the glass in museum can be Boro because somebody used it massively, immensely in the past. Therefore, it became Boro. For example, this is something I wrote. This is the scarf that I'm using right now. Today is too cold, so I'm not wearing it, but this is all the vintage fabric, and I'm using it as much as I can. This is not Boro yet. We can call it Boro to be fabric probably, but although I am using it every day, I'm washing it probably more than 1,000 times, not 1,000 times, 100 times, but this is not Boro yet. If I keep using it for my entire life, and the more I use it, I have to patch it. There are a lot of holes already, which I have to cover this hole this way, and by patching, this layer might be 6 layers or 5 layers, and then it's gonna be Boro. It doesn't matter what kind of fabric they use, to be honest. You can, of course, although it's not my preference, putting the colorful fabric is not wrong. Although, if they understand the story behind it, they wouldn't probably put the colorful fabric anyway. But the essence is using it. You have to keep using it. There might be some tomato sauce here, or might be blood. You don't know, but I don't know. Just a lot of sweat. Lots of using it, then it becomes Boro. Without using it, it's not gonna be Boro. And using it is really difficult because, they did not. I think if they put it under the kind of vase, flower vase, they don't have that much friction in their life. So it wouldn't be Boro as quick as possible. So most of the Boro is like a jacket, blanket, the mattress for the shoes, sandals, Japanese sandals. Those are very famous Boro, but it requires like massive amount of using it. That's why I don't like putting the food on the Boro fabric. Well, that's one taboo that I define. Please don't put the food, especially please don't put the food directly on the. Yeah, that's not. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but just it's too much psychological barriers there. Please don't. But yeah, the time to spend together with is the most important unavoidable essence. It doesn't have to be stitched. It doesn't have to be hand stitched. It can be anything. The stitches doesn't have to be accurate. It doesn't even have to be Sashiko for that matter. Just using it. And as Maggie said, thank you, that using it is called story, right? When I use this fabric as the scarf while eating the pasta because it's extremely cold outside is a story of my life. I might be with my daughter, I don't know why I was eating the pasta sauce with this, scarf on around my neck. Usually nobody eats the food around that, but there was the moment that I was eating it. That's the story. As long as we use it, the story comes on more like a very ordinary stories, not the fancy stories. It can be fancy, but more ordinary that you don't even remember. And the accumulation of those ordinary stories with stitching, so-called Sashiko, is gonna make the Boro. And then I think we can. I mean, after you kind of get this stories, or even like a, how can I say that? Impression, not impression. After imagining those view, then I think we can call the pieces Boro inspired or Boro-ish. The looking itself is not that important. So the people use inspired as the word to kind of excuse themselves, or you know from the I'm still not comfortable or confident to talk about cultural appropriation, but some people think that the word inspired is the silver bullet to the problem of cultural appropriation. Some cases probably yes, but for me, it does not really change anything. Um, the people who are here today listening to this story, if they decided to call their stitching Sashiko and the result as a Boro, I will support. I am happy because you're trying to listen. You're trying to learn. But those who kind of blocks or filter what I say and only wants to hear something comfortable, then inspired by looking, that's kind of shallow to me. So I don't really like that. What was I saying? What was I saying? No, no, inspired. No. Completely forgot about something I was talking 2 minutes ago. That is horrible. Inspired. Why did I talk about inspired? This is age. Oh, oi. I'm sorry. Oive is not the language for my culture, but I married a Jewish person, so please forgive me that. What was I talking about? Inspired. Boro. Sashiko. Stories. Hardly. Oh my gosh, I completely. Scary. Just 2 minutes. 2 minutes ago, I was talking about something. Boro wearing my scarf? Oh, yes. Boro wearing my scarf is the ordinary things. So I want you to be inspired by those things instead of how it looks. I mean, how it looks is very important, but at the same time, I mean, it's not that difficult to even imagine, right? It's not that difficult because this happened everywhere in the world. We just happen to have the word for that. Your culture had at 100%. I mean, not 100%. I don't know you. I don't know your culture, so I cannot call it 100%. But most likely, your grandmas or grandma probably did very similar things. And they did exactly the same process. It's a different pattern, different mindset, different philosophy, different culture, but the practice or even the result is probably similar. Therefore, without understanding those sentiment, there we go. Sentiment, inspired is a little scary word for that. I still feel like I'm missing something, but yeah, it's okay. Thank you for educating me so that I know some of the back story when I stitch. My pleasure. My pleasure. So it's not about who actually, or what for that matter. um, I get a lot of questions or even worries if they are crossing the boundaries by doing it, by calling it Sashiko, by doing Boro. Do I, cross the line? Am I doing the cultural appropriation? Probably some people say yes to that. Maybe. Uh, there's extreme ideas as well. Uh, but I'm not there. I'm like, no matter what color your skin is, no matter white, black, Asian, it doesn't really matter. Anybody can enjoy Sashiko unless they're willing to learn, unless they are willing to listen to these kind of stories from the Japanese. I mean, some people feel privileged. I am very privileged too, but the privilege itself is not a good or bad. It's just a matter of acknowledgement. So if you know that we can make a change, I just want you to be mindful, and then that just how can I explain that? There are something that is missing because of the language, because of the people who translated did not understand the Japanese fully. Therefore, there are something missing there. And lastly, lastly, and this is kind of like a advertisement, but not for me. I talked about the lady Wada Sensei, Miss Wada. If you do this shibori, you may know her very well because she's like a living legend in shibori. She may be the person who introduced shibori to English, to the Western society. Anyway, again, I don't want to call her friend because she's much superior than me, and I respect her so much. And friend is a little bit too casual to say it, but she always WhatsApp me like, "Hey, what's up, Atsushi-san?" Like, okay, okay. Anyway, so she's now in the PhD program studying about the Boro phenomenon. So she is doing what I'm sharing in the PhD program, which is really fantastic, and I will follow her after I complete my job as the father. But yeah, she is researching what Boro is from the etymological perspective, etymology. And you are listening to the stories of a Japanese person who practiced Sashiko for his entire life, with sometimes hating Sashiko, with sometimes loving Sashiko. Um, by the way, I did not stitch for the entire life, but I was with Sashiko for entire my life. What was I saying? So, but you are listening to the story from one person, and I am not representing all of the Sashiko Oboro. Just unfortunately, right now, there are not that many Japanese who can speak up in English like this. The translation does not do a good job, unfortunately, for this cultural topic, because I have made so many mistakes so far. Um, the Japanese, who is of course fluent in Japanese, is going to have a series of lectures about stitchery in Japan, or probably in Japan, I guess. The first two webinar is about Sashiko and Boro, and she does not probably do Sashiko stitching that much, but she is a good textile professional and good researcher, so it might be a good idea to learn from her. She might say something contradicting to what I say, and I think that's a very good point. Why it is so contradicting? It's not the process of defining what is the answer, what is right or wrong. It is the process of figuring out why there's a conflict. There might not be any conflict, but if there is any conflict, that's something we can learn a lot. And of course, I will be there too. The second one I might not be able to because I'm gonna be on play, but unless the first one, I will try to be there, and that might be a good opportunity for anybody who are like, you're listening. If you're a long follower from my Instagram or YouTube, you know my stories, but that's only part of one story, one family. So it is very important to listen to the other stories, not the wishful story, either research or the actual stories, experience. Like, I wish Boro to be like that. It's not the really. It's a good story, but it's not the. I was gonna finish, but I threw it again. The link, I will put the link into the this description somewhere. You know what? I'm gonna do the running stitch, like a running stitch. Do I have anywhere left? Okay, so thank you so much for today's live streaming. I cannot believe it has been 1 hour and 50 minutes already. But this is gonna be the Thursday night. I will talk about what Sashiko is, usually what Sashiko is, not Boro is. But while I talk about Sashiko while I'm stitching, I hope that I can share some other stories, and then you can really find what Sashiko really is for us. Unfortunately, the Sashiko and Boro introduced in English right now is not enough. They're not wrong, but not enough to call it the Sashiko. And those informations are very amusing, attractive, because they give you the answer. They provide a quick answer and quick tutorials. And it is okay as long as they share the stories around it, but at the same time, they're well marketed to satisfy the instant gratification. So it is designed already to be shortened so that they can enjoy it. They can spend money on fabric or thread or supplies or template. And their goal is to move on, move on, the trend circulate, and that's one of the things. The people, the craftsmen who do sashiko only for 30 years, 40 years are rare. I don't know many. They usually, like, it's only, I don't want to say it's only, but it's a stitching craft, right? So you can kind of circulate sashiko, darning, hand stitching, embroidery. Like, you can, many professional craftsmen, professional hobbyists, they're very, very skilled people who do not sell, who do not make it as a business. They think it's a hobby. They're very skilled, but they kind of circulate, which is great. They enjoy crafting as their, hobby. But at the same time, there are people who are trying to protect the industry. So it is very important to learn from everybody available so that we can one day understand what Sashiko really is. And please bring the something stitching with. And this live streaming is not so fun by just looking at it. It's not like a game live streaming or there's nothing. I'm not showing my face. I'm not making any funny face. It's not, I wish I could be like a stand-up comedian, but I'm not, not that type of a person. I'm not good at it. I love those, but I cannot do it myself. Anyway, so that's not what I want to say. And so if you can bring something stitching or something, knitting, something crafting, even cooking is fine. Then it's gonna be a place for us to be together over the internet. And that's, I think, what Sashiko was very good at. They made a place, they created a place, opportunity to be together with somebody by stitching. We have a word for that. Ibasho is the word for that place to be. And I want to make this live streaming or Sashiko as the media or vehicle to care for each other just a little bit more. Just, you don't have to do anything specific, but like if I stop doing the live streaming for, let's say, 4 weeks, you may wonder what's going on. Like if I don't update any Instagram for, a few weeks, you may wonder, is he okay? And that's a little care that I would like to encourage many people. That little care will probably change the world. It's too fast. I mean, I like fast, but there are a lot of there are a lot of unfortunate we can avoid by being a little bit mindful, a little bit more careful, more considerate. What is he doing? What is he saying? What is she doing? What is she thinking? Why is she doing that? Those little moment and opportunity to think, even once a week, will probably change your life. And when we change our life, they change the society a little bit. And since Sashiko is a good, for me and probably for many of you, is a good way to not to focus it. I, as you know, I do not focus on stitching at all. I focus on my talking. So I will switch the camera so I can show you the bigger piece. Just a second, okay. So I hope this live streaming is gonna be the place for that. Oof. There's a comment. Thank you. Enjoy watching you stitch. It is like ASMR for me. What is that ASMR? I've been enjoying tuning into your stream while working on lace project and have learned so much. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure. Everybody has their, their own things. It can be cooking. It can be anything. Anything is fine. Anything is fine, but not smartphone is even fine for that matter. But if there is a moment that we can think about something else besides the productivity's efficiency, handcrafting itself is not efficient at this moment, right? If we only care about the result, we shouldn't do the handcrafting. We should buy it probably. I mean, the people who do handcrafting in today's world are looking for something besides the result. This is my opinion, so it might be wrong. But for that, I think we can be more careful, more mindful to the others than the others who only look at the result. And I don't know which is better or worse, but since I would like to live in the society where people can care each other even a little bit, just a little bit. We don't have to like help or support each other. Well, I don't want to make the communist society. I'm not saying like, those things. We don't have to do that, but a little bit of care might be helpful for that. So I will show you the. Is this gonna be? It's okay, right? So this is the things I've been stitching for last 2 hours actually. But people can stitch this much in 2 hours. No, I mean 3 hours. I'm sorry. It's not gonna be Sonoha yet, but sorry for the noise. This is gonna be the curtain to cover the little bit of boxes, and Sashiko is not difficult. Sashiko is not. Sashiko is not about making one perfect stitch. Sashiko is not about judging what is the best stitching size or how accurate it is. It's not the brain activities. It's just if you are the craftsman, it's a hand. It's not here to do it. So I hope that I will try my best to come here on Thursday night 9 p.m. I'm so sorry for those who cannot come because of the time differences. I'm so sorry about it. And I do have a live streaming in Japanese the tomorrow morning in the Eastern time, which is the night time in Japan. Those 2 live streaming are gonna be the periodic one. That's my resolution for 2022. And I hope you can come to the live streaming next week as well. Alternate sensory. I will Google that. ASMR. Okay, thank you. There's a lot to learn. Okay, so I will go off. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope we will see you next Thursday. If you have not checked my Instagram, please follow that. I pretty much share a story per day. There's a lot of information there, including how to. Alright, thank you so much. Have a good night. Bye bye. 日本語ですいません。ありがとうございました。今日の夜、日本時間の10時半から、日本語でだらだら喋りながらまだ差し越しようと思ってますので、よかったらご参加ください。ありがとうございました。